see you've found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, listener, for tuning into today's episode of The Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James. Believe it or not, and you probably do believe it, this is the first time I've done a Zoom interview. And if you're not seeing the Zoom interview, it's because you're listening to the podcast in the regular podcast format. But if you are one of my Patreon subscribers, you'll actually get to see the Zoom interview and see the pictures and all the other little bits and pieces part of the interview I have. It is with an author and an experiencer named Andrea Perron. I call her Andrea Perron because I think it's just because I had all that French language training when I was a kid in school. But Andrea and her siblings are, you may have heard about them. They're connected to a house that was in Rhode Island back when they lived there from about 1970 to 1980. And their experiences is basically what the movie The Conjuring and all the little spin-off Conjurings are based on. So that's the Perron family. I said it again, Perron. It's going to be hard to say. Anyway, yeah, it's very, very cool. We're not going to just talk to her about the hauntings and the Ed and Lorraine Hill seance, which the psychic ended up opening a portal and having Andrea's mother thrown across the living room. But we will touch a little bit on that. But you can find interviews with Andrea about that kind of stuff all over the place. We will do a couple more with her directly about all the hauntings going on in the house. But we touch on a lot of it. But we actually deal a lot with Andrea's connection to other ghostly activity and what she's seen. Same with her family and her sister, who had been seeing and hearing spirits in the house. We also talked to her about what she calls her galactic family. So yes, typical intuitive, kind of empathic, psychic kind of people. They have a lot of connections with a lot of weird energies. So we're going to talk to her about the weird energies she's run into. So that's Andrea Perron, Perron. It's Perron, for God's sakes. So it's Andrea and her family in that lovely little Rhode Island home that you know from The Conjuring. So I'm going to go get her. No, she's not in here. This is just a whole other scary, spooky kind of place that's near my house. It's an old sanatorium. It's a nut house. Anyway, talk to you guys later, and I'll go get Andrea. Andrea, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you today, dear?
I am well here on the lower left Canadian coast, and it's chilly. And you are on the opposite side of the continent, and it's not chilly.
No, it's warm and wet and balmy, and we have a hurricane / tropical storm that can't quite make up its mind and is having a split personality or an identity crisis that wants to maneuver around. I mean, we've been following it now for a week and a half. It has come on shore, it has gone off, it's coming back on, then it goes back off. Yeah, so I'm dealing with that right now, but it's about, it's pushing 80 degrees here. So yeah, it's warm. Florida, I live in paradise now. You know, I don't live in Rhode Island anymore. And I really enjoy living down here. What is also really great about living down here is that my friends who are scattered all over the, contiguous United States and all over the world, when they come to Florida, they have a place to crash for free. So that works for me.
Make a note.
Yeah. Okay.
Hang out with Andrea when I go to Florida.
Okay. And I'm only 30 minutes away from the theme parks. So
Oh,
you can't go wrong if you're into Mickey Mouse. It's just down the street.
I have been there. I
Have you?
took my kids many years ago to Disney World, and I'm not a snake person, but I did go to the Everglades, and I learned all about.
You're lucky you got out alive.
I heard about the intrusive, snake species, and then someone I was talking to down there says, they have snake wranglers every morning at Disneyland there, and they go out and clear the snakes off all the paths and out of the trees that are hanging over the. What? Like Disney World is full of snakes? Oh yeah, it's like they have, but they're not all poisonous.
It's a swamp. It's a reclaimed swamp. That's what it is. That's what it's built on.
Yeah, the snakes just don't know it's reclaimed. They go.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. It's wetlands that were completely and utterly abused to pave over, to put I don't understand how people think. I mean, like the whole boa constrictors and these huge pythons that are all over the Everglades now, that are wiping out all of the indigenous species there. That's what David Letterman used to call stupid human tricks. Buy a cute little snake, and when it gets too big that it's the size of your apartment, just go release it into the wild so that it can kill everything that it encounters. And then suddenly you don't have any other species except boa constrictors.
One of the reasons, one of the major contributors to that was a hurricane taking out an exotic animal facility.
Yes.
Like the breeding area for the African rock python and all these other exotic species of reptiles that they thought, okay, we could just sell these. We'll sell them around the U.S. as people want them, and we'll breed them here. Friggin' hurricane wiped it out, and they all just left and went into the wild. And that was in the 80s or something. So they've done well. It's a good environment to be a reptile.
Well, the only really good thing about Florida is, it so upsets me to see feral animals that have been, somebody brings them into their family and then they move and they just turn the animals out like they mean nothing to them at all. But at least they can survive down here.
I'd like to take you back just so my listener knows a little bit about where this, because you are intuitive and you have an ability, and we'll get into that. But most people know you and your family as a result of an incident, multiple events that happened in the 1970s when you lived up in Rhode Island.
Yes.
How old were you then? You were early teens?
I was 12 years old. I was 11 when my mom found the farm. By the time my parents purchased it and we moved in, I was 12. And we lived there until I was 21. And I still, to this day, can't believe that they actually sold the farm. I mean, it was the strangest thing. I pulled out one of my old pictures for you, and I took this photograph right after we moved in. I can see my father's old Bonneville sticking out the back. So
is this the picture that I just put up behind me?
It's similar to it. This is just the front porch of the house.
The porch. Yes. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. And it was right after we moved in. I was kind of like the family archivist. I was always the one that wanted to take photographs. So I'm responsible for a lot of them.
I am responsible for this.
I am, because I don't think that, I mean, we were so busy living and dealing with the dead that a lot of times, the recording of our childhood kind of got left to the holidays. No, I mean, we have a lot of Christmas pictures and Thanksgiving pictures and, things like that, but not a lot of just living there pictures because we were so busy living.
Oh yeah, it's like most families back then, and it wasn't like we always, as a kid grew up in the 70s too. We didn't carry cameras around with us like we do now.
Right.
And so it was kind of, you had to be in that right. You had to either forethought of taking a photo. I've got to get the camera, make sure there's film in it, make sure, or the flash cube it's got all 4 flashes on it still, and then have a subject to take the picture of. So there was a lot of planning. And there were those people that loved them. They would walk around with a 35 millimeter camera constantly and just snap away at stuff, more of the art photos. But for us as kids, it wasn't a toy. It wasn't always there. And again, at Christmas, it seems to be, going back in our albums, it's holidays where the whole family's together and someone brings the cameras out.
Right.
This picture behind me is of your house, that you took that picture.
Yep. And the Mazda belonged to Christine. This was taken in 1976.
The Mazda?
The Mazda belonged to Christine, the gray one in front.
Yeah.
The blue LTD was my mother's car, and the English Rover beside it was my father's. And then he got a Chevy van that in the it's an old brown Chevy van, I think it was the Doobies that wrote about that. Yeah,
that came right to mind when you said the Chevy van.
Yep. And during the blizzard of 78, we had 63 inches of snow over 3 or 4 days. And when it was finally over, we couldn't find the van. It had been buried in a snowdrift. The snow literally went up the side of the house. It actually turned out that it was in front of the woodshed. But we had forgotten where it had been parked, and we couldn't find it. We had to dig it out because the snow had drifted so high that it literally covered my bedroom window, which is directly behind your head in this shot. Right up the side of the roof. It was,
so is that your bedroom window here?
Yep, right there under the big chimney. Yep. There. And my window was completely covered. The whole roof of the woodshed and the summer kitchen, which is the extension on the house there, you could not tell where the snow ended and the house began. Yeah. So, between cutting an average of 16 to 20 cords of wood a year and shoveling on average of 3 to 4 feet of snow a year, on average, I built muscle mass that most men would be jealous of.
Damn it, woman, get out there and shovel snow. It's your job.
Yeah, no more.
You had 5 siblings or 4 siblings?
4, yeah. My sister Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and the baby was April. And April sadly passed away in 2017, which none of us will ever get over. And we're just grateful that she comes and visits so regularly that sometimes she makes it hard to miss her. And Christmas is coming. She always shows up at Christmas and makes her presence known in miraculous ways. I'd still much rather have her back in flesh and blood, but that can't be. I'll show you a picture of her. She's the most beautiful.
Oh, she's
my baby sister. My blue-eyed blonde bombshell. Yep, she was my baby too.
Aw. You talk about this house and you mentioned living with the dead.
Yeah.
Now describe the area to us. Now, of course, if anyone has seen the movies about this, The Conjuring, it's obviously they found one of the traditional scary houses.
Yeah.
To use it in the film, which is common. But as somebody who's been on paranormal teams and actually doing investigation, These are the kind of houses, and actually townhouses too, like the end unit of a townhouse that was built in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Look, you know, people think, oh, that's an old house, it's really scary. Dude,
Yeah, and the ghost that you meet's wearing a members only jacket. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Walking around with, see, I live on the West Coast, in the Northwest Coast. So old buildings are mid 1800s to late 1800s.
Yeah, Victorian.
You live on the East Coast and grew up on the East Coast. Old buildings go back to the 1500s.
Yes.
Like I was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and there are buildings. We went into a building from the 16 or 1700s that was haunted by people who died in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody before that. This was a guy who killed his girlfriend back in the day. And then, of course, the battlefield, which has got everybody on it. But even my friend Nora runs the last remaining of the 4 Undertaker locations in Tombstone, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very haunted. She's an intuitive, a psychic, a medium, and she walks out on the boardwalk in front of the door of the old mortuary, Watt and Tarbell's. And I said, okay, what's it look like? You got a bunch of ghost cowboys walking around? And she said, yeah, but there's also ghosts from like last Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's like just everybody shows up because of the energy. So you're in Rhode Island. You're in, I was almost at Harrisburg. It's not Harrisburg, is it? No,
Harrisville.
It's Harrisville. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Harrisburg was where I landed to go to Gettysburg.
Yeah.
What is the geography there like? And the area where your house was, yeah, you grew there, you went there in the 70s, but how old was the house originally?
The land, the original property, was deeded in 1680. Okay. The house as it stands now was completed in 1736, but was begun and then built on to over the decades. So the original family that built the house were the Richardsons, and they had followed Roger Williams down from the Massachusetts Bay Colony when he was turned away from that's where he originated from. And then in the deep midwinter, after having a falling out with the elders over some philosophical arguments, they turned him out into a blinding snowstorm, and he was very ill. I'm sure they thought he would just go freeze to death and, that he was going to die. And the Indians saved him. And he founded the original colony of Rhode Island after he had gone down. I guess they took him down close to where the Narragansett Bay is. Rhode Island is quite small. The county that I live in here is larger than my home state. I was the only one in my family, besides my father, who was born in Rhode Island. My 4 younger sisters were all born in Connecticut, and my mother comes from Georgia, was born in South Georgia. So that's one thing that my father and I have in common, was we were born in the same hospital.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Everything in Rhode Island is old. It's a very provincial, to the extent that a 10-minute drive is 10 minutes too long. And we, because it just literally goes from town to town. There's no space between the villages or the towns. You just go from one to the next to the next. For its size, it's pretty highly populated, and yet it still has less than 1 million people in the whole state. It's 23 miles wide at its widest point, and it's 52 miles long, not counting Block Island. And I think I've driven on every single road in that state. I know that state like the back of my hand. Its average mean temperature is 51 degrees. I'm going to stay in Florida and visit Rhode Island frequently for the rest of my life, but not in November,
not in the
December,
winter.
January, February, or March.
Yeah.
Because I've shoveled as much snow as I intend to for the rest of my life.
Yep. You're
But
done,
it is
done shoveling snow and cutting wood.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I still cut wood.
Oh,
I do. Yep. When I go visit my family in Georgia, in fact, I was there a couple of months ago, and I cut and stacked and split about a cord of wood so that she would have some winter wood. Because even it does get cold in Georgia too. It's not New England, but it does get cold in Georgia. So, and I wrote my books there. I wrote my trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light, at that house in Villa Rica, Georgia. And it's just it's not an old farmhouse. It's about maybe from the 40s. I think it was built around in the late 30s, early 40s. We call it the house that Jackass built because there isn't a single level floor in the whole thing, not molding around a doorway that matches any other one in the house. It's got its own personality, but it's snug as a bug, and it's got a beautiful 300-year-old water oak right behind it that's so large that fingertip to fingertip it takes, I think, 8 people to stand around it. That's how big the tree is. And in fact, my mom and my sister chose that house not because of the house, because of the tree. Yeah, we're tree huggers from way back. I'm
going to jump back a bit here to your house in Rhode Island and the kids growing up in there and the energy around that house. And I've got some base questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
As a kid, did you used to wake up between 3 and 4:30 in the morning?
Every single night.
Did you see shadows in your room?
All the time.
Do you know you're dreaming when you're dreaming?
Yes, I know I'm dreaming when I'm dreaming, and I know I'm awake when I'm awake, and I know when I'm straddling dimensions.
Do you ever find yourself attracting narcissists into your life?
Yes.
And then all the other basic empath stuff, feeling other people's feelings, the anxieties, the energies around you. And
always,
all
since
that,
I was a child.
Yes. And ever suffered from what we may call now PTSD?
Uh-huh.
Because that's only us.
Yeah.
Only higher vibration people suffer from PTSD.
Yeah, because at some point in our lives, we suffered what most people would refer to as some form of blunt force trauma. And whether it was, for me, quite early in life.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it. I mean, let me just put it to you this way. I have felt like a misfit from the moment of my arrival on this planet. I'm quite certain that some clerical error was made somewhere in the universe. I straddle dimensions and portals as though it's not supernatural, it's natural. I've been faking it till I make it my whole life. And I have walked around this earth saying, what is this? Where is this? Why am I here? For my whole life. I'm not from here. I'm on the earth, but I'm not of the earth. I'm not from here.
Any of your siblings have that too?
Not really.
How about your mother?
My mother, for sure.
Is that where you think you get it from?
Yeah, mitochondrial DNA.
Yeah. So your intuitiveness, your ability, your vibration comes down to your mother's side of the family.
Yes.
Does she have, you said she's got Scottish in her family. Does she have Irish too?
Yes.
Any American Indian in there?
Cherokee.
Yeah, you're screwed.
I know. Thanks.
No, that's as Caucasians, I've said this a number of times. Now, I've been interviewing people like that, like you, like us, for a long time. A long time being like 6 years. But I've been living with this for a long time. What I figured out, and why I ask you those questions, is people who are of an intuitive vibration, a medium, we call the umbrella term empath. If you're Caucasian, we are going to have relatives that are Welsh, Irish, Scottish, Scandinavian with a dip into Germany, into like the Black Forest area, or the inside of the boot of Italy, the coast of France, Spain, Portugal. And
I'm half French
Morocco.
On my father's side.
Yeah, and that's our indigenous, that is us, a Caucasian's indigenous background. Because if we went back 300 years, 400 years, we were living with the earth,
yes,
not off of the earth. So we believed in those weird things we saw in the forest, the elemental beings, the fairies, the elves, whatever. Where if you had a indigenous population of North, Central, and South America, going back that far, they're going, oh yeah, there's those things live in the forest. This looks after the lake, this looks after the streams, this looks after the trees. That's what we saw. But we haven't, that chunk of Europe hasn't had that pushed out of them yet. Prior to that, going east through Europe to like northern Italy, parts of France, Germany, into Switzerland, over into the Middle East, Christianity really plummeted that on your head. Kind of talked those people out of it 400, 500, 600, 700 years ago, that all those weird things you see are demons, so you can't believe in those. So we start shutting it down. But that chunk of Europe and the British Isles, we'll say Great Britain too, but it's Great Britain is kind of a bastardized group of Scottish, Irish, whoever, French, a big chunk of France, a bit of Germany, and that's, other than the Celts, the base Celts, it's kind of a melting pot of that chunk of Europe. But you go over to like I get mine from my mother's side of the family. Her maiden name was Fife, but you go back far enough and she's into Ireland. Half of my mother's family showed up in Massachusetts in 1628, which I always tease my American friends whose family showed up there in the early 1800s. They go, no. I'm more
American than newbies. Yeah,
I'm more American than you. American. But that side of the family was the intuitive side. My father's the British side, with a bit of northern Britain, northeastern Britain. It gets in a little bit of the woo-woo side, but not as heavy as my mother's side. And when I first saw shadows in my room, like walking at the foot of my bed and coming up beside me, and I reached out to touch it, like the next day I said, Mom, looks like dude, like the next day. It was the next morning. My mother, I remember she's at the sink, and I said, this is what I saw. And she didn't even look at me. She just said, well, sometimes that happens. And I went, oh, okay.
Yeah,
that was
she said the right thing.
Yeah, but I always remember she didn't even look at me. She goes, sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
Later on, and again, in hindsight, I can look at the way my mother reacted to certain things and go, oh, that makes total sense. Her gut feeling.
That's because of her own familiarity with it. One of the things that I find so distressing is that, people raise their children to be honest, and then when their children are honest with them about something that they see, they dismiss it as if, it's a nightmare, it's in your imagination, that's not real. I've lectured about this a lot and said, I wonder how many little girls like myself as a child came out of her bedroom in the morning and said, Mommy, Grandma read me a bedtime story last night. And the mother says, that's not possible, honey. Your grandmother died before you were born. And just dismisses it. Whereas the appropriate questions to ask would be, oh, she did? What was she wearing? Did she mention me? What story did she tell you? Oh, I'll bet it was one she told me to. Okay, did she mention me? No,
Yeah.
I mean, and engage the child, engage the child, because obviously, a 3 or a 4-year-old child is not going to manufacture this elaborate story of grandma coming and joining her in her bed and reading to her or singing to her or sharing, if it's a song, what song was it? That's the way children are born into this world, knowing that in some way, shape, or form, they're immortal. And we who have had that processed out of us by the so-called authorities have a tendency to try to shut down in them what got shut down in us, rather than asking the appropriate questions and letting them be open to their true nature, letting them be seers. And instead, they're born with that third eye open wide. And then the parents try to shut it and relegate them to living in a 3-dimensional, 5-sensory realm, when that's not the truth of our existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like trying to shove a chick back into its shell.
I went to when I was on a paranormal team, I got a phone call from a lady who lived a few miles from here, who said that her daughter, who was like 1, 2, would stand up in her crib, however old you'd be in a crib, and would talk to an invisible person. So she thought there was a ghost in the place, and we should come out and do a paranormal investigation. And I said, that doesn't sound like a ghost. That's usually a relative. So I said, is there any, your grandmother, dad, is your mother passed, whatever. And she said, well, it would be my grandmother. And
show the child pictures
and
said, see who they identify. I
did a photo lineup. So I said, get a picture of your grandmother that she's never seen and 3 or 4 other people about the same age, and say, do you know anybody? And this kid said, yeah, that's the person who comes to see me. Okay. So she said, so what can we do about that? And I said, nothing. It's not a ghost. It's not something you would cross over. In fact, if a paranormal team showed up and wanted to talk to it, it just leaves, because it's not here to communicate on that level. It's completely a different energy. It's not like a ghost who doesn't know it's dead or it's, or it's haunting. It's crossed over already and just comes back and hangs out.
Family.
Yeah. So your house, again, this house you moved into in the 70s, when you were talking about the history of the house and the original owner and the landowners and things like that, in your experience, and obviously it was a negative thing. Some of it was negative, but was there
some of it, but a lot of it was very positive and extremely enlightening. For me personally, it was the most illuminating decade of my life. And my mother, who really suffered in that house, would tell you the exact same thing. She has said to me on numerous occasions that it was the most illuminating decade of her life. And because of living in that farmhouse, she has no fear of death, because she knows unequivocally that there is something beyond our mortal existence. And so it's not just ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that some element of us, our soul, our character, our energy, our consciousness continues on. And I find that incredibly comforting. And it gives me a great deal of hope, because honestly, why go through this thing called life in this totally screwed up place that I call soul school, where the test always precedes the lesson, and go through all the learning and the grieving and the loving and the giving and the kissing and the sharing and the learning, and go through all of that and then just have it dissipate into the ether upon our death.
Yeah.
What a waste.
Yeah. We're not, in the great scheme of things, we're not here very long anyway. So
No.
get out and do some stuff.
Yeah.
Go experience. We're supposed to be experiencing things. So experience, taste everything, touch everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why I'm not allowed on public transit anymore. But the
okay, see, there's our connection right there.
Yeah.
No, there it is right there. Because if you hadn't said that, I was going to, or something closely akin to it.
Okay. You're growing up in this house. You're one of 5 kidlings. What was some of the first things that occurred to you that weren't some of the stuff you'd want to share with schoolmates, like something that happened in your house? And again, we're only going to touch on this. We're going to do a whole other chat with you about the whole Conjuring thing. And
yeah, and we'll do that at a later time. There's like 1,000 interviews out there just focused on that. I'm loving having this, what I perceive to be an intimate conversation with you. This is different, and this is enjoyable to me.
You can tell I'm not wearing pants. I knew it. Damn it.
I thought you were going to wear the kilt.
Yeah. The leather one, or anyway. So you're in this house, and all of a sudden you realize that you have, and I'm not going to say it's an ability, because at the time you don't know it's an ability or a disability, that there are other things that are going on. How do you experience it? What are you feeling? What are you sensing? What are you smelling? What is different as when it first hit you as a little kid?
Okay, it wasn't different for me right away, because the first time that I saw a full body apparition, which was within 5 minutes of moving into the farm, as I was carrying a box to my mother in the kitchen,
Crikey.
I saw an oddly dressed man, much like yourself, actually, which I find, extraordinarily appealing. And I knew that there was something very different about him, but he appeared as flesh and blood to me. And as I walked past him, I said, "Good morning, sir." And he did not respond to me. He looked right through me and was watching Mr. Kenyon, the owner of the home, who we had just bought it from, who was packing up the last of his belongings. My sister Nancy saw him disappear before her eyes. And then a few hours later, the 4 of the 5 of us, because April was just a little peanut. She was only 5, and she was in the kitchen helping, being mommy's little helper, unpacking the boxes marked kitchen, so that we could actually have dinner in our new old home that night. So mom never really came into the dining room, but her 4 eldest girls were standing there when my father was speaking with Mr. Kenyon and asking him. It was obvious that he didn't want to leave. It was obvious that he was forlorn, that he was deeply saddened by having to sell the house. And he wanted our family to have it. He fell in love with our family. We had known him for 6 months and visited frequently, and any of us had ever seen anything strange or, otherworldly at all at the times that we visited the farm, until the day we moved in as owners. And so Dad was asking Mr. Kenyon if he would like to just stay and live with us and live out his years in the home that he loved. And he was so sad. And he said, "My son would not allow that. He's built a home for me on his property in the village, but I would love to come and visit." And Dad was telling him, "Anytime you want, anytime, this home will always be open to you. This is your home too." And that's when the apparition reappeared. And my sisters and I were just kind of looking at each other like, "Do you see him? Do you see him? You see him too?" But we weren't talking about it with each other. We knew not to say anything. And the reason we knew not to say anything was because the adult men in the room didn't see him, and we did. And that was my first experience with apparitions, entities, ghostly manifestations. There was nothing threatening about him at all. He he had a very pleasant face, albeit weathered. He still looked like he was a relatively young man, but had worked outside in the sun a lot. And he had a quirky grin on his face, and he had his arms folded, and he had a leg up against the wall. Like he had integrated with the physical space. He was in our space, but we were also in his space simultaneously. And that was the beginning of it. And that's how we lived for the next 10 years. And when my mother finally understood that we were living in a so-called haunted house, and we had divulged to her some of the things that we had experienced. She said, you must always be kind to them, even if they're not kind to you. You must always be kind to them, because they're not just passing through. They're attached to this house. This was their house first. We're the intruders. So she got it. She got it. I want to just read something to you, dear, that I have kind of incorporated and included in my show and you know, things that I do in my lectures. And I wrote it down today to share it with you. And it's one of my favorite quotations. It's in 2 of my books. It's in the trilogy, and then it's also in my new book about extraterrestrials. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. And that's Madame Curie, a brilliant woman who was never given her due. For me, what I experienced at the farmhouse touched me so deeply that I integrated it into me. It became part of me. And I think that the same can be said for anybody's life experience. It's an accumulation of events to process and digest and consider. But what we grew up in terms of our environment was so unusual. I was a straight A, goody two-shoes student who almost got expelled from high school because I dared to speak about what was happening at our farmhouse. And I learned quickly that if I wanted to continue in my accelerated college courses and have a shot at going to a good school, that I needed to shut my mouth. And it was hard because so many of the kids in town, you know, that house had a reputation long before we got there. We just didn't know about it. And, you know, it's the reason why I got a degree in philosophy. It's the reason why I started reading the metaphysical writers, you know, the transcendentalists, Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau, Hawthorne. You know, I was immersed in that. I was very intellectually precocious. I mean, I started delving deeply into that literature when I was 12 and 13 years old. Before we even moved to the farm, I knew there was something different about me. I hesitate to use the word special because I think that we're all special in our own unique persona. All of us, all human beings, are a rare and precious gem scattered upon the earth. But there was something different about me. I can communicate with animals, any animal. Doesn't matter if it's wild or domesticated. I understand them. I understand their language. They each have a different language, and yet they all communicate in a very like-minded way. I was born with the ability to read music. I didn't know until I was 14 years old that not everybody knew how to read sheet music. or, was able to compose music, like just sit down and write it down and just write it down. I've been a songwriter. I play 7 different instruments. I was a theater actor for decades. Did countless Broadway musicals, countless. I don't know how many roles I've had. I was always a creative being. I'm an artist. I love to paint. I love to take photographs. I love to express myself in poetry and prose and music. Everybody says I'm a very lyrical writer, and that's because there's a soundtrack playing in my head. I have perfect pitch. I hear full orchestras in my head. I can sing a song, what people would consider would be a cappella, but they don't hear the orchestra in my head. It's right there.
Do you find, as you make me stutter asking this question, do you find you channel?
Yeah.
When you're writing music and things, it
Yes.
just flows, and specifically painting too.
Yes.
It's like you're watching somebody else do it.
Yes. I'm always outside myself, watching myself be myself a lot. But I'm so hesitant to use labels because we do have a tendency to compartmentalize ourselves in very limiting ways. But yet we also have this language that affords us a vernacular in which to describe ourselves. So I shun the labels. I don't consider myself a medium or psychic or this or that or intuitive or an empath or, I'm everything. I'm everything all wrapped up into one thing. And my expression of consciousness is all of that. But I find that I found out why I'm here about 10 years ago when I published my first of the trilogy. And I didn't know. I didn't know if anybody would want to read it. I didn't know if there was an audience for it. I hadn't even been approached about the making of a movie yet when I started writing the book, which was supposed to be 1 book and it turned into 3 because it was a damn long story. But when I started going out and kind of toe dabbling into the paranormal community in the world, I found my people.
I'm back. Yeah, sorry, my internet connection. I went to open up another page, and I'm really bad at this whole. This is my if you can't tell, this is my very first Zoom thing that I'm doing, and very first.
I think you're doing splendidly well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. Splendidly well. Also the ETs have a tendency to really screw with my technical stuff. I just want to let you know that. They can really mess things up.
That was Mr. Parker, who ran into, he was abducted back in the 70s. I can't remember Mr. Parker's first name now. And he's written a new book on it. We did a 2-hour interview, and same thing. The whole thing wasn't anywhere captured. And it was, so a psychic friend said to me, yeah, it happens, especially when you're talking with abductees about their experiences. All the little meters looks like you're recording it.
Yeah.
I did this at a UFO conference. I talked to a fellow who had an experience and then had a regression to retrieve that 10 hours of lost time. Came out of the regression. I said, so what was it like? What happened? So he sat down, talked to me for 2 hours. Nothing was recorded, even though all the little lights in the meters were saying it was. It's like somebody doesn't want this out there. So, oh my God, are we slow? We stopped again?
Canada, nothing was recorded. It flipped him out. But he's one of the the people that said to me, helped me to, of which I've suffered much in my own life. But I have this kind of open vessel thing where I can wrap my arms around someone and they begin to weep in my arms. And at that point, I lean over and I say, just give me your pain as if you're giving me a gift. Don't worry, I won't hold on to it. It will just dissipate. It will be gone. Just give it to me. Give it all to me. I can take it. It won't hurt me at all. And sobbing. I had a man, I take people out. I didn't put anything in the first 3 books. House of Darkness, House of Light, the trilogy is just about, it starts before we move to the farm. It ends after we leave the farm. Am I still with you? There's glowy stuff going on all around you right now. There's lights all around you. Your shoulders, your neck. I would say maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I discovered what I think is my most significant gift. I'm a very sensitive person. I mean, like, I cry at dog food commercials if there's a dog in there that looks like a dog I used to have. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I thought I would outgrow it, but at 62 years old, I'm pretty sure I'm stuck with it for life now.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I do when I travel around the country and I meet my readers and you know, my paranormal people, is something that happens organically. And, you know, they might have already read the books or even just seen the film, which bears absolutely no resemblance to the books whatsoever, but still they feel a connection.
Yeah.
And it's often because they've experienced things that they've never shared with anyone before as children. And then as adults, you know, always kept it inside themselves. And I find that human beings, because we're such fear-based carbon units, that the fear of rejection, oversharing something that is phenomenal in nature, leaves them feeling very vulnerable. And it is that fear of rejection that keeps them silent and keeps them carrying that baggage, often lifelong. And yet there's something, it's like I know the magic release button on every human being that I encounter. And people will, I mean, I have so many people that can attest to this as witnesses. Folks will just walk up to me and I'll just wrap my arms around them in a loving embrace. And they begin to weep. They sob. Men, women, all different ages, and they just cry in my arms. And I'll lean over and I'll say, just give me your pain. Give it to me as a gift. I won't keep it. I'll let it go. It won't stay. It won't harm me. It won't weigh me down. It will just release. So just give it to me. And then you won't have to carry it anymore. And it's miraculous what happens. The energy exchange, the hyperlinking of consciousness in those moments is mystical and magical and scientific. You know, I've always believed that magic is science we don't understand yet. But it's real and it's pure and it's true. And it unburdens them, it liberates them. And about maybe 8-9 years ago, I discovered that what I do personally on my own, is I have a truly profound connection with the galactic family, extraterrestrials that circumnavigate this globe in numbers that no one can wrap their heads around. but I see them all the time. I interconnect with them all the time. It's a totally natural thing. It's not supernatural at all. They are sentient, prescient beings who are here because they love us dearly. And so it was a number of years ago, some people got wind of the fact that I communicate with extraterrestrials, and I do it in song, in music. I do what Dr. Stephen Greer does with his CE5 project. I just do it differently than he does it, but it's the same thing. And it's not that they come when I call them or I beckon them. They're already here. They just make their presence known to me and anyone who is with me. And so I went outside and I had a whole group of people. I must have had 50 or 60 people that followed me as though I was the Pied Piper or something. And I just started belting out, "I love you for sentimental reasons," which is their favorite song. They love stuff from the 30s and the 40s. And fortunately, I know all that music. And so the sky just started filling with light. They were coming from every conceivable direction. And we were in a very well lit parking lot. You would think that all the residual light would have been an impediment, and yet it had nothing to do, because their light is so pure that it just completely filled the sky. And a man who was at the time 72 years old walked up to me at the end as I was kind of like done. I was done. I was exhausted and my voice was shot and I was done. We were out there for almost an hour, and he came and he wrapped his arms around me, and I hadn't even met him at the event. I was up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, of all places, which is one of the largest paranormal paracons in the whole country, the Upper Peninsula Michigan Paracon, every year in August. And he just draped himself over me and he started to sob. And he said, "I have waited my whole life for this experience." He said, "You changed everything. Everything has changed for me. I will never, ever think or feel about anything the same way again." And when you can have that kind of an impact on another human being, to me, that's a gift. To me, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I've been doing it ever since. Hold on a second. Peanut. Oh, Princess Buttercup. Oh, Peanut. She's barking. She'll come. I'm sure she'll make her presence known shortly. Oh, there she is. There's my baby girl. There she is. Come over here. Come here. I want to introduce you to you big fat girl. I want to introduce you to James. This is my baby. This is my baby girl. She is my Princess Peanut Buttercup. She is the joy and the love of my life. And I rescued her off of a highway in January when she was injured and about 3 pounds. Now she's 10 plus. Okay, you go get him. You go get him, Tiger. It's nothing at all. It's the wind. And we have squalls coming through. So when the wind picks up, she gets all excited. Yeah, I rescued her and she rescued me right back. I got her just in time for COVID. So I didn't have a chance to be depressed because she's the center of my universe. Yeah, she's all healed up now and fat as a fritter, and well, not fat, but she's at her proper weight now. And she's my princess. And so, of course, whenever she tells me she wants anything, there's only one reasonable response, and that's "as you wish." As you wish, my dear. But anyway, I don't think that I would have fully developed what some would call, capabilities. Had I not grown up in my childhood home, which was, as I've always described, to be a portal cleverly disguised as a farmhouse. It was there that I discovered that we live in multiple dimensions simultaneously, that the reason why I could see the spirits and the spirits could see me was because we were sharing space. And even if it was just for a few moments, it was a few blissful moments. I think that of all, and some really terrible things happened in that house. There was a spirit in that house that haunted and taunted my mother relentlessly. And also appeared to my sister Cindy. And I think why Cindy was targeted so much was because when she was an infant, she was born with a birth defect that could have killed her. She was born with a hemangioma on her face that was filling with blood. And it was so large, it was like the size of a grapefruit after a couple of weeks from her birth. And they had to ginger ale. Hold on. It required major surgery to repair it. And she passed away on the table and they brought her back. So Cindy had already crossed and had been to the other side, whatever that other side is. I think that that's why they could communicate with her with such ease. And she's the one who heard the voices all around her bed starting right away. Like the first or second night that we were in the house, she came and crawled into bed with me. I was the only one that had my own room. At the time, she was sharing a room right next to mine with my sister Christine, and she crawled into bed and she said, "I hear voices in my room. Can't you hear them? They're so loud. I can't believe you can't hear them." And I asked her, I let her into the bed with me, of course, and cuddled up next to her. And it was freezing cold. It was a terribly cold winter that year. And we had moved in right after Christmas. It was January 11th, the day that we moved in, 1971, even though we bought the house in 1970. But Mr. Kenyon wasn't ready to leave yet. And my mother refused to move over Christmas, which made perfect sense.
Yeah.
But she said, yeah, they're all talking to me at once. They're all saying the same thing, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. It's like shaking the bed and shaking the walls and the glass in the windows. How can you not hear it? And I asked her what they were saying, and what they were saying to her was, there are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. And 45 years later, as I was writing the books, well, 30, I guess it was, I started about 30 years after we moved. I asked her at one point, how many times did you hear that over the course of the decade that we lived in the farmhouse? And she said, thousands. There was never a night that they didn't come to her and tell her that they were there. And we thought that maybe they were buried in a wall of the house that had been closed off. But it seems upon further investigation recently that there's a very good chance that they were buried outside near the stone wall that blocked off the 6 acres of backyard before we went out onto the other 200 acres of the property.
So not the wall of the house itself, but a stone wall that was built
outside.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big retaining wall along the back of the house that runs the length of the foundation, the cellar. And then there's the whole property is enclosed with stone walls that were built in probably the late 1600s. And it makes sense because, I mean, that house as it stands was completed 40 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So it lived through the Revolutionary War. It survived the Civil War. It survived numerous border skirmishes because the Massachusetts Bay Colony was always at war with the colony of Rhode Island, trying to claim its little bit of land. And in fact, when we bought the estate, 60 acres of it was in Massachusetts because of a war that got lost. Because it was originally, the land was originally deeded to create a corner border against Connecticut encroaching from the west and Massachusetts encroaching from the north. And our house was in the corner of the state, the far northwest corner of the state. So, you know, there were a multitude of experiences that we had, and some of them were, yes, very negative, and there were several instances that were even what to this day I perceive to be life-threatening. But I think that the most significant of all of the events that occurred at the house happened to my mother. And it was post Ed and Lorraine Warren. They had come and gone. My father had thrown them out the night they came to initiate a seance in the house. And it went so horribly wrong that it almost cost my mother her life. And in fact, when they left the house that night, they did not know if she was dead or alive. She was laying in the middle of our parlor floor in the chair that she had been tossed in from the dining room some 20 feet in a split second. My father was able to revive her. She had a terrible concussion. But after that, she started wasting away. She had actually begun wasting away prior to that. And that's why Mrs. Warren said that they had to conduct a seance and brought a medium with them who committed what I consider to be spiritual malpractice, in that she threw open wide the doors to the netherworld and invited everything in so that she could determine who the culprit was in the house. Whatever came through was pure unadulterated evil, and attacked my mother and tossed her as though she was a pebble from one room to the next, after infiltrating her for several moments. That was horrifying to watch. It was the worst event of my life, having witnessed it. That was even conducted with 4 of the 5 children in the house was alone reason enough to dismiss that woman as not knowing what she was doing, you know, to expose children to what we saw, even though we were told to, you know, go away. Of course, you know, we came downstairs, we watched from a proper vantage point that was distanced enough where we could see and yet not be seen. But it was a couple of months later, and my mom was trying to just live on coffee and cigarettes, I guess. I mean, she had pretty much stopped eating. She appeared to be waif-like. There was not much left to her. And she got up one night quite late, and I had already fed my sisters. I kind of assumed the surrogate parent position. My father was away on business, and I made dinner and got the girls in their jammies, got the homework done, got them all off to bed. And then I was sitting in the parlor doing my own homework. I was, I guess, about 15, maybe 16 years old at the time. And Mom got up and she told me she was hungry, which delighted me because I knew she hadn't eaten all day long. And she asked me what I made for dinner. And I said, I made a beef stew in the pressure cooker, which I miss. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it was the best pressure cooker ever. She asked me if I would go warm up some stew for her. Well, I had already closed the house down for the night, and I walked from the parlor happily, went through the darkened dining room, through the front foyer, into the kitchen, and then into the pantry. And since microwaves had not been invented yet, And Mr. Coffee didn't exist yet. She had also asked me to make her a short pot of coffee. So I had to get the percolator going and warm her up a bowl of beef stew on the stove. And in the interim, while I was gone, she leaned over. I'd built a fire. It was very cold that night. October, of course it was cold. And she threw a log on the fireplace, and as she was replacing the screen in front of it, she heard laughter behind her. And she turned and looked into the dining room, and the dining room was full of a family that was having dinner, and they were having beef stew. So I often wondered if it was me just telling her that I had made beef stew that had triggered that, where the dimensions came together for a few moments. The fireplace in that room had been originally part of the center chimney, which had been removed because of disrepair, and the fireplace had been sealed for probably close to 100 years when we moved in that house. And yet that fireplace was open. There was a raging fire in it. The mistress of the house was reaching in with her full-length dress and her cast iron tool to lift the pot off the rack and put it on the table, and told her children to sit down on their benches. It was a hand-hewn oak table. It had candles and oil lamps on it for light. And there were two men that were sitting on the other side of the table. And they had pewter steins in front of them, which would be indicative of the 1700s, because pewter was outlawed for dinnerware by the 1800s because
Right.
they determined the lead content was deadly. So they had their pewter steins in front of them, and everybody seemed, Mom said, they were very happy and just enjoying each other's company. And where the mother started dipping stew for her kids. And one of the men looked into the parlor, and he saw my mother standing on the hearthstone, and he nudged the man beside him and pointed her out to him, and she was the ghost. And he smiled at her.
Interesting.
And she was like, you know, it suddenly made sense to my extremely intelligent, pragmatic Virgo mother that they were occupying the same space at the same time in separate dimensions, and that she was peering into the past while they were simultaneously looking into the future. And I've always considered, and when I came back in the room and I had a tray of coffee and stew for my mother, she was just glowing. She was glowing. It was like all the blood rushed up into her face, and she had color in her pasty white skin again. And she was just so happy. And it was because she had just had an epiphany. And I think that's the most important thing that ever happened in that house. It was her moment of knowledge and recognition that we shared space with other families, that there was a familial, even though there was no ancestral connection between our family and them. Because 8 generations of one extended family lived and died in that house, and a boatload of them never left, or they visit frequently.
Yeah.
One or the other. And she got it. She got it. And she stopped being fearful. And that was a blessing.
Well, my understanding is that when you cross over, you can experience joy and things you did when you were younger. So my mother, who is right here over my left shoulder, allegedly, I just got total, I don't know if you can see, I got total goosebumps on the left side of me when I said that, on my face and my arm. Anyway, so my mother's here. She also is dancing at a club in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1951.
Yeah.
Exactly at the same time as she's here, exactly at the same time as in the 70s, she's sitting on a summer home having a glass of wine on the porch. So I could see as the family having dinner around that table may have may have been one of those happy family moments
Yeah.
that they all, and I don't mean a ghost,
Right.
per se, like a ghost. Just so you follow me here, my explanation of a ghost is a dead human being, this energy that hasn't crossed over.
Mm.
And then a spirit, you've crossed over and come back and, hang out with a grandkid, or, like my mother does, go dancing. So she may have actually seen those who have crossed over, but that was a comfortable place. And that was a time that they all were feeling that same loving energy, and it was warmth. It was, stew is a comfort food, and
Yeah.
you're with family, and they every so often come back, or you open that little window of, oh, remember when we had stew there? Let's all go relive that for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So they're dead and crossed over, and they're looking at your mother, not so much as that she's in the future, but as she's there now.
Mm-hmm.
And they allow her to see them.
Yeah.
And then her recognition of them is, yeah, we got her. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. The negative stuff, again, bothers me. I always debate whether there are demons versus elemental beings that are just jackasses. And of course, ghosts, not people who've crossed over and got all their crap dealt with, but a ghost of somebody who was an asshat in life and continues that role in death.
Mm-hmm.
And, then you get into varying energies and stuff like that. You were in Rhode Island. You're in Florida now, and Florida, just like the southern tip of Vancouver Island, just where I am, which is the southern tip of Vancouver Island, just north of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, where during the tide change, the Pacific Ocean squeezes through a very narrow point and creates a lot of energy. And those two areas are known to be some of the most haunted places in North America, just like the southern tip of Florida is one of the most haunted places in North America. Well, I don't think they're any more haunted than anywhere else. I just think that we see them more because of the energy they can draw from.
Yes.
So depending on how close you are to moving water,
mm-hmm.
Where were you guys near, when you were in Rhode Island, were you near, like, was there underground streams? Was there a river nearby? And
yeah, it was, our house was built on the Lost River of New Hampshire that was buried during the last ice age. At the base of the bottom of the backyard proper, the Nipmuc River ran through. There were countless streams and tributaries feeding it. There was water everywhere.
I have a picture of your old house up back, so people know what that house is compared to the one that's in the movie.
Yeah,
which is
in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Of course, and probably warmer to film there than
except that Rhode Island doesn't have any Spanish moss hanging out of the trees.
Yeah.
They had to send a whole entire crew out there to pull all the Spanish moss out of the trees before they could shoot.
Andrea, we've kind of touched a bit on your house, but the energy and the water, when you talk about a portal, it's just it's a wonderful way for a dead person to move things, to grab energy, the moving water. When I was in, I go down the west coast of the United States, and I go to places like Portland, Oregon, and Seaside, Oregon, another wonderfully haunted place, because tidal movement with a river coming through it. Areas like around, we always talk about a gold mine, a haunted gold mine town, old gold mining town, the ghost towns. Well, most of them have a river, and the ground is full of quartz.
Yes.
So, like, you look at Tombstone, Arizona, not near any rivers, but it's literally sitting on a silver mine. The mine shafts go underneath the town. Like there's quartz all over the place. There is just solar loading from the sun into this, which again, my friends who are psychics down there said, yeah, that's why every dead person in town, you can see them.
Yeah.
It's not like there's more of them there than there are in another town. It's just that when they have the availability to make themselves feel good by just tapping into the existing energy, we see them. And they can move stuff because they can use that boost of energy, because no matter what kind of vibration you were while you were in this meat sack and living,
Yes.
and no matter what you describe as being a higher vibration person, when you're dead, you're not that higher vibration anymore. You're down here. And it's really nice. That's why we bring them home. That's why people like you and I bring them home, because we'll walk down the street with this light and they're going, oh, look at them. I feel really good hanging out with them. And then they follow you home. And then that's who wakes us up between 4 in the morning, 4:30 is going, Andrea, because I've been doing that on your shoulder all day long. Andrea,
Yeah.
Andrea. But as soon as that veil thins, Andrea, you wake up and go, oh, who are you? Yeah, can you help me? There's like 7 guys buried under the rock wall here. It's like, I'm going to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Or as a kid, you'd say, leave me alone, pull the covers over your head. And there are rules. So they leave you alone. Unless they're kid ghosts. And then that's a whole other issue, because
that is a whole nother thing.
They exist in love and light. So they don't really care.
Right.
Yeah. So the haunting, any haunting, I find the best ones are near railway tracks that maybe down the road, the railway crosses a river and that energy still goes down the middle, and, under power lines or someplace where a dead person can suck energy from and like wave at you and you can see them. And then of course you've got your family, your mother and you and Cindy, who are already that tuned in anyway.
Yes.
And then on top of all the energy, it's just a cacophony of sparkles you're going to see. Now you actually, from this in your life, as you grew to understand dimensions, you started seeing things that weren't dead people. Right. You have a connection with it's a terrible term to call them, extraterrestrials.
I call them the galactic family.
Yeah, so you have a connection with the galactic family. When did that click in you, going, dead person? Oh, who the heck is that? Not so dead person, and not so much a person, or maybe they are. When did that happen?
When I was right around my birthday, the first year that we lived at the farm, 1971, and I always credit living in the farmhouse with opening my third eye fully. And I tell folks that I had my first conscious contact with my intergalactic neighbors, my galactic family, when I was either 12 or 13. I think it was just after my 13th birthday. The leaves were turning. It was chilly, nippy day, clear, bright blue skies, absolutely beautiful outside. And I saw an entire flotilla of vessels pass directly over the farm. And I don't know if I would have seen it had I not been exposed to fourth dimension energy in that house for the first year that we had lived there. It was maybe 9 months after we moved in. And it was my personal paradigm shift. It was when everything changed for me. Not only had I also already processed that we were not alone in the house, that there was something beyond our mortal existence. But that was when everything changed for me. Everything.
Describe the type of craft you saw.
It was massive. It was gigantic. And it was surrounded by probably a couple of dozen much smaller vessels that were all geometric in shape and form. They looked like a burnished silver or bronze, seamless. If there was a circle on one side, there was a circle on the other, or squares or triangles or quadrangles or octagons. They were all different shapes. But the main vessel, and because I was so young, I didn't have the depth perception that I have as an adult. I couldn't tell how high up it was, but it was definitely in our atmosphere because it blocked out the setting sun.
What was its shape, the main one?
Long. It was long, and then it narrowed at the ends, and it looked like a city that had been turned upside down. So everything that was protruding out of it looked like high-rise office buildings upside down. Like
a big metal jellyfish.
Yeah, and I could see, little specks of light where there must have been windows. Or it was absolutely gorgeous. It was gorgeous. And it was completely silent. And it felt like I could reach out and touch it. But it was still much. I can't tell you how big it was. As I've said before, I can't tell you if it was as big as Fenway Park in Boston or Manhattan. I don't know how big it was. But made my nose itch, Peanut. That means I kissed a fool. It was splendid. And I felt no fear at all. It was a supreme moment of recognition. And I've described it as my first conscious contact because I feel certain that I had contact prior to that. But that was the first time I was allowed to remember.
That's interesting.
And it changed everything for me. It literally, I started, and back then there wasn't a whole lot of literature on the subject that was available, but whatever there was, I devoured it. I would, ask my mother to take me down to Providence to go to the Providence Public Library, which was gigantic. I could have lived happily ever after in that library, and would, hunt down and try to find whatever I could about that subject, and would often, because I didn't want to check it out because it was so far away, I didn't know if I'd get it back on time before I'd owe money on it. So I would just sit there and read, and like devour 40 or 50 pages. And then Mom would say, okay, I got to make dinner, got to go.
You would go to the library and you would devour everything
that I could read on the subject. Yeah. And then when Whitley Strieber, decades later, released Communion, I read that book. I sobbed. I felt such a connection. And then in Transformation, his follow-up to it, I don't know. I literally integrated with the book. It was to me, there was nothing frightening about it at all, and I know that I have had lost time. I don't ever refer to myself as an abductee, ever, because there's such a negative connotation to that word. And I just like to think that I have visited with them repeatedly. I have been off planet. I don't care who thinks I'm a nut job. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not here for everyone. I'm here for those who listen to my words and what I'm telling them resonates with them. on some subliminal level or even consciously resonates because they've had like experiences, and everyone else, it doesn't matter.
Could you describe the beings that you have contact with?
I actually have had contact with a number of different races. The tall whites, the Pleiades, the Pleiadians, Arcturians. I don't hang around with the Greys. I really don't interact with the Greys, although the Greys do sometimes interact with me.
The short ones or the tall ones?
The short ones, the little ones. They're adorable. They're so cute. But they're partially artificial intelligence. They're not fully humanoid. And so
my understanding that they're little worker bees for other groups.
Yeah, and it's not that they don't have any empathy. They don't have human emotions. And so there are connections between, there's a multitude of races that are keeping a very close eye on us at this pivotal time in history. Particularly, I mean, when we started blowing off, hydrogen and atomic bombs, if there was a way for them to get here, they got here. As the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer once said, they looked down upon us and said, "Oh no, the children are playing with matches." And because our universe is completely integrated, when we were doing damage to our own planet, we were likewise damaging someplace elsewhere in the universe. And so not only were they concerned that we were going to destroy ourselves and our absolutely magnificently beautiful planet, but that we were going to take other life forms with us.
Yep.
And so they knew that we had gotten just smart enough to self-destruct. And came in droves. Now I had a download last night that literally woke me up. It was so loud. And it was just in my left ear last night. I usually get them in my right ear or in both ears simultaneously, but it was a massive download. And I presumed, I don't know what the messages are that I'm getting. They go directly into my subconscious mind, but I had a feeling, and this was a very long one. This was a good 5-6 minutes. And I just sat up in bed and closed my eyes and just took it in. I learned long ago not to fight that, just to take it in, absorb it. But I had a feeling it had something to do with you today. And then when we met in cyberspace, having talked on the phone at length prior to doing this little interlude, I knew that it had something to do with you. I feel what I feel for you, I feel for them. Which is something that I describe as higher love. It's not love of this plane of action. It's not human love. It's greater. It's richer. It's fuller. It's ancient. And so I knew the first time that you contacted me weeks ago that that when we actually did meet, first in this venue and then we will, later in person, that both of us will have that same moment of recognition, that same sense of familiarity. You are definitely a contactee. You don't even have to tell me that you are. I know that you are. And that brings me comfort as well. Because see, for me, this isn't a belief system. This isn't having faith in some higher power or this is knowledge. This is knowledge that has been imparted to me. I am humbled by it. I feel blessed by it. And it makes me unique and yet not so. I'm one of countless millions and millions of people all over this planet that are contactees, that have had experiences that, just common people with uncommon experiences. And so what I do is simply speak my truth. I couldn't have written my books had I not gotten past the point where I was fearful of rejection. I couldn't speak my truth if I was, afraid to be shunned or, considered emotionally unstable, mentally not quite all there. I don't care. I don't care at all who thinks what of me. It was a great book written years ago. I met the author back in the 80s. God, I can't remember her name right now, but she wrote this great book, What You Think of Me Is None of My Business. And so that's really kind of my mantra now, or one of them. It really does. I'm not here for everyone. We're all the same, and yet not all the same. Some of us, we're all going through a form of spiritual ascension, enlightenment, as it were, all of us, everybody on planet Earth. And we're entering the fifth dimension and beyond now. This is it. This is what was forecast when the Mayan calendar came to an abrupt end at the end of the Piscean age. And everybody said, oh, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world, and yet the next day the sun rose and everybody made coffee and,
Yeah,
but it was the end of the world. It was the end of the world as we knew it. And this is the new age of enlightenment and a higher awareness. And it's not a ladder that we climb. It's not like Jacob's ladder. It's not like I'm at a higher rung than you are, or somebody is beneath me. It is a ladder that we each personally navigate in our own evolution. And so I try to impart whatever information I have. And on my fan page on Facebook, I have a banner that's been there for quite some time. And I just love the message so much that I just leave it there. And it says, I did not come to teach you. I came to love you. Love will teach you. It's about light and love. It's what it's all about. Love is the answer to every single question. Ask any question on any subject, and the common denominator is love.
Your experiences as you grow older, it's like turning a page and learning something new in a book. And your book is very thick. You have this, you've learned a lot in this short human time we've existed in this plane. And now we're going into the fifth dimension. We skipped the fourth, which is always interesting. I guess we didn't need to. But the third dimension was more about us and ego and building, and let's create wealth, and let's build a fence around the house and have a garden, and this is our family. Now, the fifth dimension, in my understanding, is getting rid of ego and tearing down the fences and creating the global connection.
Right.
That we haven't had, and that refusal to isolate others, but more inclusive of
it is
others we're with.
Ultimately, my dear, it is the attainment of the realization of oneness, that we are all one human race, that we are indeed all in this together. And I think that it's ironic that a microscopic virus could be what saves the human race. even though it will claim millions of us before it's done running its course. Because we have to have our hearts broken wide open. There won't be any of us that are untouched by this before it's over. None of us will be unchanged, unaltered by it. And many, many of us, millions and millions of us, will have lost someone that we love dearly. And as the great poet and artist Leonard Cohen wrote, there is a crack in everything. That is how the light gets in. And we have to break wide open, like the cosmic secrecy of seed. And that's a very painful process. And it happens in the dark, buried beneath the ground. And yet it is the source of all life. I had an interesting experience. It was interesting that you were talking about spirit waking me in the middle of the night. I don't always know who is waking me. It's absolutely deliberate. I don't just spontaneously wake up in the middle of the night. There is something that
you are awakened.
I am.
You're not just opening your eyes. Yeah.
Right. And one night, about maybe 3-4 years ago, I was jolted, like physically pushed in my bed. And it was winter and it was cold. It had to be like in the 60s outside. I would have had to put my robe and my slippers on to go out in Florida in the winter at night. And you can make that funny face now, even though I can't see it. You can go ahead and do that. But I got pushed and shoved, and I had just closed down my computer. I had been working. I often work. I'm a night owl. I work very late at night frequently. And I had just gone to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't want to get back up. And something pushed me, like physically moved me in my bed. And I said, no, stop. I'm going to sleep. And then I got pushed and jolted again. So I grabbed my robe and threw on my slippers, and I went outside, and I have a very generous parking lot, driveway, huge, in front of my house, and then the lake. And so I went out and I stood in the middle of it, and I will admit, I was slightly irritated. And I looked up and I said, "What is it?" And I didn't see anything in the sky, but I had a flash of light in, like, behind my eyes, like here, like I had been touched by E.T., you know, that flash with the finger. Yeah. I mean, like, boom, flash of light. And all of a sudden, I went from being what was maybe 58, 59 years old at the time to 12. And it was the first spring that we were at the farm. And in that split second, the whole thing unfolded in front of my eyes, in my psychic eye. And I was back at the farm with my parents and my sisters, and Mom and Dad had loaded us up into the big ass Bonneville, which you saw you can see part of in that other picture that I had. And we had gone over and crossed over into Connecticut, which was only like a 10-minute drive. And there was a chicken farm there, and the husband and wife that ran the farm welcomed us to the area. I mean, we were like neighbors because there weren't that many houses or farms out in the area. It was quite remote. And while my dad was talking to the husband, the wife took my mother and my sisters into the part of the chicken coops where they would allow chicks to be born. And there was this long row of like cup-like incubators that was on a shelf. And some of the eggs were moving, and I got really excited. And I reached out to crack open one of the eggs so that I could see the baby chick. And my mother took my hand and retracted it. And she said, "Oh no, honey, you can't crack the egg. You can't let the chick out because it will die." And I was mortified because I didn't know. I was ignorant of the fact that if I cracked that egg open, that baby would not survive. And because I learned my lesson so well that day, I don't think I ever thought about it again until that night. And I came back in, and I came back here into my man cave, and I opened up my computer, and I wrote a treatise called The Chicken and the Egg. And it was in that moment of recognition that they can't crack our egg, our 3D, 5-sensory shell that we live in by choice. It's what we're born into. We have to peck our way out. And what my mother was trying to tell me was the identical amount of energy that it requires for that baby chick to peck its way out of that egg is equivalent to the amount of strength it will gain and energy that it will need to survive on the outside of the egg.
Okay.
And so there it was. It was The Chicken and the Egg, which went into my newest book, A Wonder to Behold. And it's the shortest chapter, but it's one of my favorite chapters in the whole book, because I think it explains to us that, you know, we do live in duality. We live in a world where evil and good are in constant conflict. Darkness and light have to coexist. You can't have one without the other. One would not exist without the other. And it's not just speaking in terms of a metaphor, but we literally could not see light if there was not the scrim of a dark backdrop. We couldn't see the stars without the darkness, the void. And so it hit me that we have to save ourselves from ourselves, and that they can observe from a safe distance, but they cannot intervene and they cannot interfere. And so, you know, the good news and the bad news is that we're on our own, but we're all in this together. And if there was ever a time for human consciousness to evolve rapidly, it's at a time when all of us have to become in some way introspective. We all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I'm as susceptible as you are, as he is, as she is, to this microscopic, insidious virus that is really no different than us. It seeks only a host where it can replicate itself. It's not like it's targeting us. It's just that we are really warm, comfortable hosts for it, and it reacts differently in every vessel. And some of us will perish from it. Most of us will live through the experience, but be profoundly changed by it. And I had a moment of recognition that we really have to come to grips with how important we are to each other, as each and every one of us confronts our own mortality simultaneously. You know, and there are people on this planet who are not deep thinkers. You know that, and so do I.
That kept me employed for 28 years.
Say that again?
As a policeman, those people kept me employed for 28 years.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So they do serve a purpose. But, you know, and then there are those who remain steeped in deep thought quite a bit. And I kind of live there. I live in thought. There's never a time that my mind is quiet. And in fact, I cannot sleep without a light on, and I cannot sleep unless I have either music or the television in the background. And it doesn't even matter if it's just the Weather Channel and the same forecast going over and over and over again, and the same hokey background music. It's what short circuits my brain enough to let me go into a deeper sleep. There's never a time that I'm in the dark and in the complete quiet, because I don't know if I would even survive that element of that kind of silence anymore. And it's because I live in the stillness of my own soul. I live in a place that is dark and warm and wonderful and filled with music and light. I know that sounds completely counterintuitive, but it's really not. I think that we all have to go within, and I have a deep faith. Human beings thrive on having faith and belief systems. It's kind of the jet fuel for our engine, our brains, our mind. But I think that we're all part of one divine mind. I mean, even atheists have a belief system, and that belief system revolves around their core belief that there is no God, no higher being, But I'll tell you, growing up in that house when things were bad, the only thing that would stop it immediately, was asking for help. God help me would stop it instantly. So I believe in the greater good. I believe that there is something that is truly loving and benevolent in the universe that can circumvent and shut down anything that is nasty or evil. I don't really refer to demons per se. I've not seen a demon. I don't know if demons exist, but I do know that pure unadulterated evil does exist in the world. And it doesn't take a whole lot to prove that to me. All you have to do is turn the news on at night, and there it is. Manifestations of something that is otherwise intangible, more of an energy that navigates its way and manifestations in different forms. But I think that ultimately my personal belief system has evolved over time, and living at the farm is what developed it to such a deep extent, because I feel that each and every one of us is the living, breathing embodiment of God consciousness, that we are the way that the prime creator or source energy or infinite mind or divine intelligence, whatever you want to call it, it's the way that it sees its own creation through our eyes, through the eyes of this remarkably beautiful dinky dog who has her day-to-day experience being loved and cherished by her chosen person. It's all about love. And so because I have seen the dark side of existence, I make a deliberate choice every single day to live in the light. I live in the light. I think it is incumbent upon all of us at this moment in our evolution, in our spiritual journey. It is incumbent upon all of us to be the beacon, to be the light that we seek, to be the kind smile and the helping hand, to reach out to our fellow human being and to every vulnerable, sweet little creature that needs our help, and do whatever we can to lift each other up, to stand for what we believe in, and to help heal the world of its woes. And every single time that we generate that kind of positive, progressive energy forward, momentum forward into the light, we are cracking wide open our 3D shell and liberating ourselves from what has become so oppressive about human beings. I think that there was a time when we lived more communally, when, you know, the barter system was better than Chase Manhattan Bank, when we knew how to be a good neighbor and be a good friend and be kind and loving and giving and generous of spirit, more so than now. I think that we've regressed in some ways, and this is the time, and this is the paradigm shift. It's time to pivot and start walking in the right direction again.
I agree. There's so much coming. We've been given little glimpses into the future. I always say that the hurricane that struck Puerto Rico was a global peek into what could come. And people say, well, what do you mean? It's a hurricane. I said, no, what would happen if someone threw a switch and you couldn't use your bank card, a credit card? You couldn't go to the bank. You couldn't access money. And you still have to live.
And you had no fresh water, and you had no food, and you had no electricity, and you had no heat in the winter.
And it's going to last 90 to 120 days. So you're going to have to learn how to trade your chicken for a bag of flour.
Yeah.
Because, well, no, people argue, well, the banks would be open. Well, no, because the people who work in the banks are going to be home looking after their family, and all the computers are down. So what are they going to do? You can't walk in and say, I would like to take X amount of dollars out of my bank account, because money is electronic.
Right.
And unless you had cash or something to trade for goods, and unless you had goods to be traded for, you're kind of hooped. So this is a microcosm, this little view of how people lived for a few months. Imagine that happening on a global scale.
Right.
Look at the pandemic. We got hit, we got a shutdown. How many people had to die before that switch was flipped? Governments went, oh crap, look at all these people dying, we got to do something, let's shut everything down. We'll call that a 90-day shutdown. It was not quite 90 days. We'll call it a 90-day shutdown. In that 90 days, where I live, we had 2 bird species come back.
Yeah.
Because for the last 100 years, they've been bypassing this part of the valley that I live in, a river valley pouring out in the Pacific Ocean, because of pollution that sat over top of it. So those birds actually came back and were seen in the city. The dolphins or porpoises were seen again in the canals of Venice, and you could see the bottom of the canals, and it was clear water.
And in India, you could see the Himalayas.
I was telling people
whole lives saw the mountains in the distance that they'd never seen before.
Here, I could see at 25 miles away. It's the second largest island in the Pacific Ocean, is Vancouver Island, behind one of the islands in New Zealand. But you could stand here and actually see trees. You actually could see the trees 25 miles away with the naked eye.
Yeah.
It had never, I was telling people to get outside and do stuff, even though, stay away from people, but get out. The air hasn't been this clear for over 100 years.
Yes.
So
and
the earth,
look how fast, when we stopped doing what we do, look how fast the earth began to heal.
Within 2 months.
Yeah.
It was a little over 2 months. And people say, oh, yeah, it's global. Humans don't really have that much effect. It's like, dude, look, in like
oh, God. Yes.
a little over 2 months, this is how clean it went. We had, like, animals are coming out of the forest and walking in town because there wasn't people and cars everywhere. Right. And I live in a place where there are bears and deer. Literally, we have garbage cans with hooks in them to keep the bears out because we've encroached up into the mountains around here where animals live. And now we have houses, and people get pissed because, oh, there's bears in my backyard. You go, no, dude, you're in the bear's backyard.
Yeah.
Relax, tourist. So anyway, before I go off on that rant, but
I'll loan you my soapbox. It's plenty big.
Yeah. So anyway, we have all that going, but that's how quickly it cleared. And I look at things, I'm a little bit weird when it comes to things, serial killers and pandemics.
Mm-hmm.
People die for a reason, mostly. Our lives end. There are many reasons our time is over on this planet, and we then move on. Our meat sack is broken, but whatever it is, we have a plan. There's a plan, and we continue. This is very controversial, but I worked on an investigation of the largest serial killer in Canada. And after he was convicted, and of all the people he was convicted of killing, most of them were all of them were sex trade workers. Most of them were First Nations, or what you would call an American Indian, but here, Canadian Indian or First Nations people.
Mm-hmm.
X amount of people died. 22 he killed probably 50. He was convicted of killing 22. As a result of that conviction, people said, oh, look, he's killing the poor First Nations sex trade workers. And a national inquiry came in on missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. But if he had killed 5 people, maybe even 10, that inquiry wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. And the results of that inquiry now affect the lives of generations to come in how we look at children in reserves and mental health and support for people with drug addiction and victims of sexual abuse. Things have opened the doors to create a better path for generations to come. Mm-hmm. But X amount of people had to die before countrywide we got on a soapbox and said, this got to be looked at.
Yeah.
So I believe these women came into their life knowing, I shouldn't say knowing, but you understand what I mean when I say knowing.
I do.
This was the life I'm supposed to lead because I have a greater purpose in my death.
Yeah. What some refer to as a soul contract.
Yeah. So that many had to pass in that gruesome way to get our collective attention. COVID, the first groups of people dying were in seniors' homes. Mm-hmm. And I could see in their soul contract saying, okay, I'm going to live a full life, but I volunteer to leave if it's going to give us a snapshot of how quickly we can clean the planet. Or the planet really needs a friggin' break right now.
Yeah. And
it could be only for 100 or 200 days, but we need to calm the hell down. So yeah, I'm old anyway. I volunteer. When I get to this certain point, I volunteer to leave. So it's like looking at the victims of the serial killer and looking at the victims who've fallen prey to this horrible virus. It's like soldiers fighting the good fight. They went off to battle evil, and they died in that battle. But that was their contract. I will gladly leave this plane at this time if in the long run, this is what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Nazis will be defeated. The Khmer Rouge will be defeated. I will fight that fight, and I will be one of the ones who voluntarily leave. But this is a good hill to die on.
Yeah,
it's a good day to die, and that's my gut feeling, and that's my kind of philosophy looking at the virus is, yeah, people are going to need to. The more people that get this, and the more people that pass, the more our collective global brain says, you know, we got to fix this, but look what the byproduct of shutting down is. Look at the byproduct of slowing down, mm-hmm. not quite shutting down. Mm-hmm. But as soon as we took a deep breath and took a step back, slowing down. My daughter, my oldest daughter's in university. Both daughters in university. They're both taking their university education now virtually online. Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter is a customer service person for a company called Lush. They make cosmetics and soaps and smelly things. She used to go down, she had a part-time job, 3 days a week while in school. She'd work at an office in Vancouver. Well, when COVID hit, they sent her home. She works out of home. She still works out of home. They're not opening that office up again. They've reconfigured it where her and all her customer service people were to do something else.
Yeah.
Other companies are actually looking now at their leases that they have on corporate space that they don't have to spend money on anymore because you can work at home. So there's no commuting, there's no pollution, there's no this, there's no that. They can do everything, and in Lush anyway, and they found that they're more productive at home than they are in the office.
Well, and a lot of these buildings now are being repurposed. Down here in Florida, there are office buildings that have been vacated, that the companies that had them have decided, we do better all working from home on Zoom, and we're getting more done. And, yeah, we miss the camaraderie, but there'll be a time when we can have, group meetings in a building that we don't have to own. Let's take that building and turn it into senior housing or housing for homeless veterans, or, what can we do that will be for the greater good.
Yeah.
With the building that we've had and is, paid for, and what can we do with that building now instead of just leaving it vacant as wasted space?
Yeah.
We're getting more and more creative as we're more challenged, I think. But it was a real wake-up call. I mean, there was a hole in the ozone over the Arctic that just recently closed. It just closed spontaneously. And when the scientists that were studying it were asked, well, is it because we all shut down for a while and we stopped polluting and we let the earth breathe? And they're like, oh, no, it couldn't have been that. It could never have happened that fast. Yeah, really? Right. How about if you're wrong about that? One of the things that makes me crazy, I just found out recently, a few weeks ago, there's 1.2 million tons of cesium and liquid nuclear waste from the Fukushima Daiichi plant that Japan is planning on throwing into the Pacific Ocean. It's not just their ocean. It's our ocean. Yeah. It's our collective ocean. And they're perfectly willing to kill every living thing in it. Well, it's not separate and distinct from every other ocean. They're all connected. Just because they have different names doesn't mean they're not the same ocean.
I live on the Japanese current. I wouldn't, chunks of when they had that giant earthquake,
yeah,
that stuff was landing on the beaches here.
Yeah.
Like a Harley Davidson friggin' showed up, and they found the owner actually, and they sent it back to him. But anyway, we still find stuff from the Japanese earthquake up and down the coast, from Alaska right down into British Columbia, and actually into, I think, Washington State. Yeah, we're connected.
The debris island from Fukushima, and from Japan, is so large that creatures live on it, and it's radioactive. What are we going to do about that? Instead of making the problem worse, why don't we put our collective heads together and figure out how to clean up? I mean, that's just what's on the surface. You know how much is underneath it? Now,
next time you're talking to an alien friend,
and I have discussed this with them, because some things are really kind of, beyond. I mean, I want to know whatever possessed anyone to think that it was okay to put 4 nuclear reactors on the coastline of an island that is prone to massive earthquakes and tsunamis. Who conceived of that?
I was talking to somebody, an ET communicator, who said that a ET race has a bacteria or some kind of thing, we'll call it a bug, that is actually eating the radioactive waste around the where it was all damaged, and where it was supposed to have a half-life of 1,000 years or something. It's actually been consuming the radioactive material to the point where it may only be 150 to 100 years or something. but they're trying to fix it.
I know they're
Because
trying to help us help
yeah.
ourselves, but mostly this is up to us. And in terms of our own awareness of who we are and the damage that we're doing, we don't have a plan B. We don't have a planet B. This is too magnificent a chunk of stone hurling through space to just destroy it and everything on it. And we are literally the only animal on this planet that fouls its own nest. Literally. I took a plane ride. I don't know why this just came to me, but I swear to God, I met the reincarnation of Albert Einstein. He even looked like him. I mean, so remarkably like him that it was shocking. And it was a few years ago. It was after the Horizon oil spill in the Gulf,
Right.
which was absolutely horrifying. And we talked for the entire, when I found out that he worked for the federal government and that he was, part of the cleanup effort and the scientists who were dealing with the microbiology of it. I started crying when I was talking about it. I said, it's ruined our beautiful Gulf. It's ruined it. Why do we have to do this? Why? And he reached over and he patted my hand and he said, Andrea, the microbes in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico are eating the oil. All of it will be gone in 25 years. It will all be gone. You'll never know that horrible accident happened. And it was like I could breathe.
Yeah.
I could breathe. I mean, I believed him. And he said, this is what I do for a living. This is what I study. He said, look at Alaska, look at Prince William Sound, look at the horrible Exxon Valdez accident. He said, there's no sign of it left.
Yeah.
It's gone because nature is far more intelligent than we are. And she knows how to heal herself.
She does. And you, young lady, are going to have to leave. I don't mean you have to die now. I mean,
no, you're right.
Long ways.
I know.
Your website, which is still, you're tweaking it a bit, is House of Darkness, houseoflight.com.
Yeah.
Which
And
still happens to be the name of your trilogy.
Yeah. And I'm not only updating it because it's stale and old as, a loaf of bread from 1930. But I've been busy, writing 5 books. I'm updating the website and we're going to be relaunching that before the end of the year. And then you'll be able to go and link onto my new website, which is andreaperron.com, which will have everything on it. All the different books and all, my extended story beyond the trilogy and the farmhouse. And other mischief that I've been making, my supernatural shenanigans. But I want to thank you from my heart for having this conversation with me and sharing yourself with me. I think of us as good old friends. And I have higher love for you. I have cosmic love for you. It's been my privilege and my pleasure and my honor to join you. And I want to thank your viewers and your listeners for joining us. And you call me anytime. You got me on speed dial, okay?
I do.
And also, I just wanted to say I'm launching my old show anew. I used to do a show for almost 3 years. I did a show called A World Awakening. And I'm relaunching it tomorrow. Which is 11/11, the cosmic numbers. But it'll be available all the time. It'll be archived on my YouTube channels. So
nice.
You can reach me at Andrea Perron YouTube or House of Darkness, House of Light YouTube, and you should be able to link right in. And everybody can follow me on Facebook. And my fan page is the Buttercup Brigade. It's a very soft, cushy place in cyberspace to land. It's just full of light and love and wonderful, wonderful souls and all I can say is we're the good deed doers that wear rose-colored glasses, because it really is the only way to look at the world.
Beautiful. And your 3 books, your trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light, is about your house in Rhode Island. Then your other book, In a Flicker.
In a Flicker, I wrote with George Lopez, my friend George R. Lopez, not the stand-up comedian. He's the sit-down on his lazy ass comedian.
And that's what's that about?
Oh my God, it's so dark.
Briefly. Is it fiction or nonfiction?
It's a combination. It's an amalgamation of both. But if you're an aficionado of Jack the Ripper, it's just your thing. And time travel. You got to be into time travel. And then my new book, which I will be re-releasing in its extended version, now that the paradigm shift has arrived. Since the whole book was about the pending paradigm shift, I had to put in another chapter, and that will be released shortly, within the next few weeks. And
that's called A Wonder to Behold.
And the subtitle is Guideposts to Intergalactic Engagement with Humanity.
Oh, I need that one.
Yeah.
All right, my friend.
Yes.
Thanks again for dropping by. And thank you for putting up with my very first Zoom, very first video interview. And we'll see you again soon. Yes. And we'll have some more chats. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your ghost stuff, because I have for my ghost people. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about your ET stuff with my ET people.
Okay, that sounds marvelous.
Okay. And have fun tomorrow, or is it tomorrow, November 11th, for your thing. And please go out and subscribe to Andrea Perron's YouTube channel. And hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thanks again, Andrea.
Thank you.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out.